Hey guys, tonight we settle into a story that feels distant in time but uncomfortably close in emotion. Before we begin, if you're enjoying these late-night history journeys, gently tap like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy the content. And as you get comfortable, tell me in the comments which country you're listening from and what the local time is there right now. Somewhere out there, it's midnight, somewhere else it's nearly dawn, and for a moment we're all awake together. You are standing on a battlefield just after the noise has drained away. The shouting is done, the metal smells sharp and tired. Somewhere nearby, Roman soldiers are laughing in that loose post-adrenaline way, the kind that says they survived another day. And then you see her, not armoured, not armed. A queen, captured, still upright, still breathing. You probably won't survive this, Roman Empire style, but for now, you're here to watch what happens next. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk closer, careful not to draw attention. In the Roman world, victory isn't finished when the enemy stops fighting. Victory has paperwork, victory has rituals, victory has rules. And one of those rules is that important women, especially queens, do not simply vanish. They are collected, preserved, shown. A captured queen is proof that Rome didn't just beat an army, it broke a people. This is your first realization tonight. Roman soldiers are not improvising here. What they do to captured queens follows patterns that feel coldly rehearsed. The mainstream historical fact is simple and widely agreed upon. Elite female captives were usually spared immediate execution. Killing them outright wasted their symbolic value. A living queen could humiliate an enemy far longer than a dead one ever could. You watch as her hands are bound, not roughly, not gently either. Functional, efficient. The soldiers know the difference between a prisoner and a message. Her posture matters. Her visibility matters. Even the way she is forced to walk matters. Roman military culture is obsessed with signaling power, and this is power theatre at its most human. There's a strange quiet around her. Legionaries who moments ago were looting shields and joking about wine rations suddenly lower their voices. Some stare, some refuse to look. A quirky but telling tidbit from ancient sources suggests soldiers believed mistreating royal women too openly could anger the gods. Foreign gods, yes, but angry divinities nonetheless. Superstition slips in where discipline ends. You follow as she's led toward the camp. No cheering now. This part is administrative. Captured queens are logged mentally before they are ever logged on wax tablets. Who is she related to? Which tribes still follow her name? Could she calm a rebellion or ignite one? Rome always thinks 2 moves ahead, even when wearing dusty sandals and blood-spattered cloaks. As you walk, you notice something else. No one tells her what will happen next. That silence is intentional. Psychological pressure is cheaper than chains. Historians still argue whether this uncertainty was an official tactic or simply an ingrained habit of Roman authority, but the effect is the same. Not knowing is its own form of restraint. You overhear a centurion mutter that she'll look good in a triumph. That sentence lands heavier than any insult. A Roman triumph is the ultimate victory parade, and queens are its crown jewels. They will be paraded through Rome itself, through streets packed with citizens who have never seen the lands she ruled, never tasted her food, never spoken her language. To them, she will be exotic, defeated, reduced to spectacle. And here's the uncomfortable reality check. Roman soldiers are trained to see her less as a person and more as a future scene. Today's captive is tomorrow's political prop. You can almost feel the shift happening in their minds, the way humanity thins once usefulness thickens. As night approaches, torches flicker on. The camp smells like oil smoke and boiled grain. The queen is given shelter, not a tent of honour, but not a cage either. Rome likes its ambiguity. She must be alive, visible and intact. Any harm done to her now could be punished, not because Rome cares about her suffering, but because Rome cares about control. A lesser-known detail, almost whispered in scholarship, is that some soldiers volunteered to guard royal women specifically because it was considered safer duty. Less frontline danger. less risk of sudden violence. It's a strange inversion. Capturing a queen could mean a calmer night's sleep for the men watching her. You sit near the edge of the firelight, listening. Soldiers talk about home, about retirement plots of land promised after service. Someone jokes that at least she won't have to march tomorrow. There's your first light joke of the night, dry and uneasy, because even humour bends around power. And still, she says nothing. Silence becomes her last remaining weapon. Rome expects tears, pleading, collapse. When those don't come, it unsettles them. Not enough to change her fate, but enough to linger. You realise this moment, this immediate aftermath, is where most people stop imagining. The capture feels like the end of the story. But for Roman queens, capture is only the beginning. What soldiers do next will echo for years, sometimes decades, shaping rebellions, alliances, and how history remembers entire peoples. As the fire crackles, you feel the weight of it settling in. This isn't about cruelty alone. It's about performance, symbolism, and fear carefully rationed. Rome doesn't rush. Rome waits. Rome watches its captives the way a chess player studies a piece already taken off the board. Still useful, still meaningful. And as the camp quiets, you stay awake, knowing tomorrow she will walk again, and every step will be measured, recorded, remembered by someone, somewhere, long after these soldiers are dust. You wake before dawn, that thin grey hour when even the Roman camp seems unsure of itself. Fires have collapsed into glowing embers, and the air feels damp against your skin. Somewhere nearby, armour creaks as soldiers stretch awake, and you remember her immediately, because Rome never forgets its important prisoners. Not for a second. She's brought out quietly. No announcement, no ceremony yet, just chains. This is where the real work begins. Roman soldiers understand something instinctively. Silence and movement together can be more terrifying than shouting. Her wrists are bound, her ankles left free for now. The chains are not heavy enough to cripple her walk, because she must walk. That's the point. A queen carried is still dignified. A queen made to walk becomes a lesson. You fall into step as the column forms. Legionaries ahead, auxiliaries behind, and in the middle, the captured royal presence. Notice how I didn't say woman. Rome sees rank before gender. A captured queen is not fragile. She is symbolic cargo. The march out of enemy territory is deliberate. Villages that resisted are passed slowly. Villages that surrendered are passed even slower. This is one of those mainstream historical facts that shows up again and again in Roman accounts. Prisoners of status were displayed early, not hidden. Let the locals see what resistance earns them. Let them recognize her face, her posture, her helplessness. You notice how soldiers subtly adjust their spacing. No one crowds her. No one walks too far away. Control lives in balance. A quirky detail tucked into a lesser-known military manual suggests soldiers were fined if a high-value prisoner was injured through negligence. Even humiliation had regulations. The road itself becomes part of the punishment. Dust coats her feet. Stones bruise softly but persistently. When she stumbles once, only once, a hand steadies her. Not kindness, but maintenance. You almost laugh at the efficiency of it, then catch yourself. Second light joke of the night. Rome invented customer service, but only for conquered royalty. As the sun rises, civilians begin to gather. Not crowds yet, clusters. Farmers pause their work, children stare. Elders squint, trying to reconcile memory with reality. This is the moment where identity fractures. She is still their queen, but now she is also Rome's prisoner, and those two truths cannot coexist for long. You listen to whispers ripple through the onlookers. Some bow their heads, others turn away. A few shout insults, desperately trying to align themselves with the winners. Rome notices all of it. Soldiers are trained observers. Every reaction is data. Historians still argue whether these early processions were centrally ordered or locally improvised by commanders eager to impress superiors. But the consistency across provinces suggests something closer to doctrine. Rome loved flexibility, but loved predictable fear even more. As hours pass, the rhythm of marching settles in. Left, right. Leather, iron. Her breathing becomes audible, not laboured yet, but controlled. She is conserving energy. Even in chains, queens calculate. At midday, the column stops. Food is distributed. She is given water first, and that detail matters. It sends a message to everyone watching. Rome is not afraid of her, but Rome values her condition. She must arrive intact, recognizable, undeniable. Dead queens cannot walk in triumphs. There's an odd intimacy to this part. Soldiers sit nearby, close enough to guard, far enough to feel human again. One complains about blisters. Another jokes about how his mother would faint if she saw him guarding royalty. There's your third light joke. Humans leaking through the armor. And yet, the threat never leaves the air. You feel it hovering. Sexual violence is never mentioned outright in Roman military records here, and that absence is loud. The legal grey zone is thick. Officially, high-status captives were protected. Unofficially, protection depended on discipline, oversight, and luck. Historians still debate how often those protections failed in transit, because the sources go quiet exactly where discomfort begins. As the march resumes, you notice something subtle but important. Her head is uncovered. No veil, no hood. Exposure is intentional. Sunburn, dust, recognition. All tools. Rome strips queens of privacy long before it strips them of life. By late afternoon, the terrain changes. Roman roads take over, straight, raised, merciless. These roads are statements carved into earth. Walking a conquered queen along them is like underlining the empire in stone. You can almost hear the message, "This land is ours now, and so is your past." A strange thing happens as they near a Roman-held town. The soldiers straighten, jokes stop, armor gets adjusted, discipline tightens. The presence of Roman civilians changes the performance. This is no longer just intimidation of the conquered. This is reassurance for the conquerors. Look what our legions bring home. Inside the town, the crowd thickens. She is slowed, turned slightly, made visible. No one throws anything. That would be disrespectful to Rome's property. Instead, people stare with fascination that borders on reverence. Exoticism replaces hatred. You feel the shift, and it's unsettling. She meets no one's eyes now. Not submission, strategy. Eye contact invites interpretation, sympathy, connection. Rome prefers blankness. So does she. As evening falls again, the gates close behind the column. She is led to a secure residence, not a dungeon. You realize Rome is already thinking long-term. Interrogation, negotiation, display, exile, all options still open. You sit near another fire, watching shadows climb stone walls. The march is over for today, but the procession has only begun. Chains may loosen later, they may tighten, but from this point on, every movement of her body belongs to an audience. And as you let your eyes close briefly, you understand something crucial. For Roman soldiers, marching a captured queen is not about cruelty. It's about reassurance. Reassurance that the world still bends, that order still holds, that Rome, for all its chaos, knows exactly how to turn a living human being into a walking sentence. You feel the city before you see it. The noise arrives first, layers of sound stacked on stone, vendors calling, animals protesting, sandals slapping pavement, and above it all that restless urban hum that only a capital of the ancient world can produce. Rome is awake, and today Rome expects to be entertained. The queen is brought forward again, and now the handling changes. Chains are adjusted, not removed, but refined. Everything about her presentation tightens. This is no longer a military march. This is rehearsal for memory. You stand along the route of the triumph, close enough to smell crushed herbs scattered on the road to keep dust down. Roman triumphs are choreographed experiences. The mainstream historical fact here is unmistakable. Triumphs were state-approved victory parades granted to elite commanders, and captured enemy leaders, kings, princes, and queens, were central visual proof that Rome had not merely fought, but dominated. The crowd swells as she appears. Some cheer wildly. Others whisper her name like a secret. Many have no idea who she is, only that she matters. That's enough. In Rome, importance is contagious. She is placed not at the front, not at the end, but precisely where eyes naturally fall. You notice how her clothing has been altered, not stripped bare. Rome avoids unnecessary scandal, but simplified. Jewelry removed. Symbols of power quietly gone. She is recognizable but reduced. Status dismantled piece by piece. You catch fragments of conversation around you. A man explains to his son that this woman once commanded armies. A woman beside you says she expected her to look taller. Expectations collapse in real time. That's part of the humiliation. Grandeur shrinks when dragged through familiar streets. A quirky tidbit slips in here, almost unbelievable until you realize how Roman spectacle worked. Some triumphs reportedly included placards listing the captured ruler's achievements, now reframed as failures. Imagine your life summarized by your enemy and paraded in front of hundreds of thousands. It's public relations warfare, ancient edition. The air smells like incense and sweat. The sun reflects off polished armor, forcing her to squint. Exposure again. Always exposure. She's meant to be seen struggling against the brightness of Rome itself. The city becomes an accomplice. Historians still argue whether queens fully understood what a triumph meant before experiencing one. Some likely imagined execution at its end. Others hoped for mercy. The truth varied. Roman precedent was inconsistent enough to keep fear alive right until the final moment. As the procession moves, you notice how the soldiers' behavior shifts yet again. This is their victory too. They march taller, chests out, faces composed. Guarding a queen through Rome elevates them briefly. They are part of the story now, not just footnotes. One soldier near you mutters that his village back home will hear about this for generations. There's your first light joke. Legacy by proximity. The crowd reacts in waves. Cheers surge, then fade into murmurs, then rise again. Children point. Elders nod approvingly. A few spectators throw flowers, not for her, but for Rome. That distinction matters. She absorbs the moment like a statue that can still feel. You realize something unsettling. The triumph is designed to drain sympathy. By the time the crowd sees her, they've already seen piles of captured weapons, exotic animals, paintings of burning cities. By comparison, she feels like just another item on the list. Dehumanization by sequence. Her steps slow slightly as the route climbs. No one helps now. Struggle is part of the display. A Roman official watches closely, ready to intervene if collapse threatens the spectacle. Death mid-parade would be inconvenient. Dying at the end is traditional. Dying early is rude. There's a scholarly uncertainty that hangs over this moment. Were queens always spared execution after triumphs? The answer is no, and also maybe. Some were executed privately, some were imprisoned, some vanished into exile. The sources contradict each other, often written decades later by men who cared more about moral lessons than accuracy. You pass beneath arches etched with older victories, layers of conquest stacked like sediment. The message is unmistakable. You're not special. You're part of a long tradition of defeat. Rome doesn't need to shout it. The stone does that for her. As the procession nears its climax, tension tightens. The queen's breathing is audible again, controlled but shallow. She knows this moment defines how she will be remembered, if she is remembered at all. Tears would be recorded. Defiance would be exaggerated. Stillness is safest. A surprising detail from fringe accounts suggests some queens were coached beforehand, told how to walk, where to look, when to stop. It's unconfirmed, but plausible. Rome loved controlling narratives. Even resistance had acceptable forms. You watch as the commander ascends to receive his honors. Applause roars. The queen is halted below, literally beneath him. Physical hierarchy made literal. She looks up once, briefly, then lowers her gaze. The crowd interprets it as submission. Only you notice it might be calculation. Then it's over, just like that. Slike. The triumph dissolves into dispersing bodies and fading cheers. Spectacle completed, memory implanted. She is led away quickly now, almost rushed. Rome has shown her off. Keeping her visible any longer risks empathy. The city has a short attention span. Tomorrow there will be another parade, another execution, another distraction. You follow at a distance as she is taken to holding quarters. Not a cell, not freedom. A pause. This is where outcomes fork. Execution orders may come, exile arrangements may begin, hostage negotiations may surface, all still possible. As night settles, torches flicker against marble. The Queen sits alone, finally unseen. The silence returns. Heavier now. You realize the triumph didn't end her story. It froze it in public memory, while the private consequences are still unfolding. You lean back against cool stone, listening to Rome exhale. The crowd has gone home. The city sleeps. Somewhere nearby, a queen waits to learn whether today was the worst moment of her life, or merely the most visible one. You don't hear the door close behind you, but you feel it. The sound is swallowed by stone, by thick walls designed to keep secrets from echoing. The triumph is over now, and with it the noise, the colour, the crowd. What remains is the quiet work Rome prefers to do out of sight. The Queen is seated across from men who do not wear armour. That alone tells you this moment matters. Soldiers conquer, but administrators decide what conquest becomes. The room smells faintly of wax and old parchment, not blood. This is not torture in the theatrical sense. This is interrogation as erosion. You notice there are no instruments laid out, no racks, no whips. The mainstream historical fact here is easy to miss because it's so uncinematic. Roman interrogations of high-status captives relied far more on psychological pressure than physical harm. Pain leaves marks. Fear leaves compliance. She is offered water, then left waiting. Minutes stretch, maybe hours. No one explains the rules of this silence. You realize this is intentional. The first lesson Rome teaches is that time no longer belongs to you. When the questions begin, they are almost polite. Names, titles, family lines, who still supports her back home, who hates her, who might rise in her absence. Each question feels conversational, but every answer tightens invisible threads around distant people. This is how empires pull strings without leaving fingerprints. You catch a strange detail. One of the men avoids looking directly at her when asking about religion. A quirky historical tidbit floats up here. Roman officials often feared offending foreign gods, especially when dealing with royal captives believed to have divine favour. Superstition coexisted comfortably with bureaucracy. Between questions there are pauses. Long ones. You can almost hear her heartbeat fill the room. She realises something before you do. This is not about extracting information she doesn't want to give. Rome already knows most of it. This is about breaking certainty, making her doubt what they know, what they believe, what they plan. Historians still argue whether Roman interrogators followed formal training or simply learned through experience. The methods vary in description, but the effect remains consistent across accounts: confusion, isolation, and controlled kindness. At one point, a clerk deliberately mispronounces her title. Not an accident. You see it land. Correcting him would acknowledge the downgrade. Ignoring it would let the insult stand. Either choice costs something. Rome wins either way. There's a moment, small, almost tender, when one official mentions her homeland casually, as if reminiscing about a place he once visited. Olive trees, wind, familiar hills. The room softens. Then, just as quickly, the topic shifts back to loyalty and consequences. Emotional whiplash. That's the technique. You feel uneasy watching this. No shouting, no violence, just careful dismantling. This is the psychological breaking point Roman writers rarely dramatized, perhaps because it didn't flatter their image of martial strength. Yet this is where many queens truly fell, not to swords, but to exhaustion of will. A fringe account suggests some interrogations included deliberate contradictions, two officials returning separately with conflicting decisions to see which outcome the captive reacted to more strongly. It's impossible to verify, but it fits the pattern. Rome tests reactions like an engineer tests materials. The queen's posture changes slightly over time, not collapse, adjustment. She learns when silence helps, when speech harms. This is survival, not surrender. You remind yourself, so does Rome, that resilience does not equal freedom. As the session ends, there is no verdict, no threat spoken aloud. That omission hangs heavier than any sentence. She's escorted back to her quarters, guarded, untouched, and deeply altered. The door closes again, softly. You sit with the aftertaste of it. The triumph was loud, humiliating, unforgettable. But this quiet room did more damage. Rome doesn't need to raise its voice. It just needs patience. Outside, night air moves gently through corridors. Somewhere a clerk scratches notes into wax that will harden by morning. Somewhere else, soldiers change shifts, unaware of how much has already been decided without them. And you understand now, for captured queens, this phase is the narrowing. Options collapsing inward, futures shrinking, execution, exile, hostage status, all still possible, but now filtered through Rome's questions, Rome's interpretations, Rome's mercy. You lean against the cool wall and let the silence stretch again. The city sleeps above you, confident in its control. Below the surface, power is doing what it does best, reshaping a human life without ever appearing cruel enough to remember. You start to notice the changes not in what is done to her, but in what is quietly taken away. Status doesn't vanish all at once in Rome. It's peeled back layer by layer, like something precious being unwrapped in reverse. Her quarters are clean, that's important. A captured queen is not thrown into filth unless Rome wants her broken beyond use. Instead, she is kept comfortable enough to feel the loss, comfortable enough to remember what comfort used to mean. This is where stripping power becomes an art. The first thing to go is a dress. No one calls her by her full royal title anymore. The mainstream historical fact is subtle but consistent in Roman sources. Captives were referred to by simplified names or generic identifiers, especially women. Language reshapes reality. When a queen stops being addressed as one, authority leaks out through the cracks. You hear a guard refer to her by her given name, clipped and Latinized, not cruel, not respectful, administrative. There's your first light joke. Rome invents nicknames and none of them are flattering. Her clothing follows, not replaced with rags, not yet, just altered. Colours muted, cuts simplified. Fabric still fine, but no longer ceremonial. Symbols matter more than comfort. Rome understands optics the way modern branding teams do, and this is a full rebrand. You notice something else. She is allowed small rituals. Washing, eating at regular hours, even prayer in some cases. A quirky historical tidbit appears here. Romans often permitted captive royalty to maintain religious practices, partly out of superstition, partly because ritual continuity reduced rebellion. Calm captives cause fewer problems, but power is preserved selectively. She is never left alone long enough to feel private. Guards rotate unpredictably. Conversations are overheard. Even silence is monitored. Rome doesn't need to watch constantly, just enough to be felt. Historians still argue whether Roman policy consciously aimed to preserve royal bloodlines, or simply reacted pragmatically when they proved useful. Either way, execution is postponed again and again. Dead queens end stories. Living ones keep options open. You realize this is the stage where Rome decides what kind of asset she will become. A warning, a bargaining chip, a future Roman ally married into the system. Royal lineage still has value, even stripped of power. Especially stripped of power. There's an uncomfortable truth hovering here. The threat of sexual violence never disappears, but it remains unspoken, officially forbidden, unofficially possible. The legal grey zone thickens. The lack of explicit record doesn't equal safety, it equals silence. Scholars tread carefully here, because absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. A guard brings her a message, news from her homeland, carefully selected. Maybe a revolt crushed, maybe a relative cooperating. Information is curated to steer emotion. Rome edits reality before delivering it. You watch her absorb the news, face controlled, fingers tightening once before relaxing again. Control of reaction becomes her last visible authority. Rome notices that too. Another quiet detail surfaces. She is fed well, better than many citizens. Grain, fruit, even wine in moderation. This isn't kindness. It's preservation. Malnourished queens make poor hostages and worse symbols. As days pass, she is occasionally brought out, not for crowds, just enough to be seen by officials, envoys, visiting elites. Exposure without applause. This is humiliation at a lower volume, but a higher frequency. It wears differently. You catch yourself thinking this is almost merciful. Then you correct yourself. Rome is not being gentle, it is being efficient. There's your second light joke. Minimal cruelty, maximum return. A scholarly uncertainty lingers here. Did some queens internalize this reduction, adapting fully to Roman expectations? Or did they remain internally sovereign, performing compliance while preserving identity? The sources can't tell us what survived inside. One afternoon, she is asked, not ordered, to attend a small banquet. Seating is arranged carefully. She is placed below senators, above minor officials. Hierarchy made edible. She speaks little, listens more. Rome watches how she navigates rank now that hers has been recalibrated. By evening, she is returned to her quarters. Another day without resolution, another day alive. The tension stretches, thin but unbroken. You sit with the realization that Rome's greatest violence here is subtraction. No blows, no screams, just the systematic removal of everything that once made her unquestionable. As night settles, oil lamps flicker softly. The queen sits in borrowed calm, wearing clothes that almost fit, holding on to a name that no longer carries weight. And you understand, Rome doesn't need to destroy queens outright. It just needs to keep them alive long enough to forget who they were. You become aware of it the way you become aware of a storm before rain, through pressure, not sound. Nothing has changed on paper. Her guards are the same, her quarters unchanged. Her food arrives on schedule. And yet, the air around her feels different now, heavier, edged with possibility. This is the part Roman sources rarely spell out, the part that survives more in implication than ink. Sexual threat lives here, not as an action recorded, but as a constant, unspoken presence. The mainstream historical fact is careful and uncomfortable. Roman law officially forbade the mistreatment of high-status captives, especially those reserved for state purposes. But law, as you know, depends on enforcement, witnesses, and who is deemed worth protecting. You notice how guards are rotated more frequently. Not because of danger from her, but danger to Rome's asset. Discipline tightens. Jokes disappear when officers pass. The system is quietly acknowledging risk without naming it. She feels it too. You can tell by how she positions herself in the room now, always within sightlines, never cornered, never overly familiar. This is learned vigilance, survival awareness refined by captivity, a quirky but revealing tidbit surfaces in fringe scholarship. Some Roman commanders issued explicit verbal warnings to troops about touching royal captives, framing it not as morality but as treason against Rome's interests. Don't harm what belongs to the state. Ownership replaces ethics. And yet, the threat doesn't need to be acted upon to work. It hums beneath every interaction, a lingering look, a pause held too long. The knowledge that her safety relies not on her own power, but on Rome's continued calculation. Historians still argue how often these boundaries were crossed, because the sources go strategically silent. Roman writers loved order and disliked embarrassment. What didn't flatter the empire was often smoothed away. Silence becomes its own kind of evidence, ambiguous, unsettling, incomplete. You hear a guard complain quietly about temptation when another passes. He laughs it off. You don't. The comment isn't about desire, it's about entitlement brushed aside by duty. That tension between impulse and regulation is where the danger lives. And here's the irony. Her royal status both protects and isolates her. A lower status captive might vanish into anonymity. A queen cannot. Too many eyes, too much at stake. Rome's restraint is not kindness, it's surveillance. You watch how she responds. She speaks less now, conserves expression. When she does speak, her tone is even, controlled, almost distant. Emotional neutrality becomes armor. There's your first light joke. Who knew composure could count as body armor? At one point, an official enters alone, dismisses the guards to the doorway, and begins discussing her future options in vague terms. Exile, residence under supervision, marriage alliances whispered but never promised. The conversation skirts edges without crossing lines. Power enjoys hovering just short of touch. She listens without reacting. You realize something important. Rome tests boundaries constantly, not just physical ones, but psychological. How much fear shows? How much resistance remains? The answers inform policy. A scholarly uncertainty hovers here. Were queens ever intentionally placed in morally compromising situations to force compliance later? Some historians suspect it, others reject it as projection. The truth, as always, hides between what is recorded and what is avoided. Days pass. Nothing happens. That's the point. Fear without incident drains energy faster than fear fulfilled. Anticipation erodes resolve. Rome understands this intuitively, the way a seasoned interrogator understands silence. You notice her sleeping position change, closer to walls, farther from doors. She leaves lights burning longer into the night. Oil lamps flicker, shadows stretching. Firelight turns stone into something almost alive. A guard brings news again, carefully framed. A relative has been spared, another punished. Cause and effect implied, never stated. Cooperation has benefits, resistance has costs. Rome doesn't threaten, it demonstrates. Second light joke slips in darkly. You think of this as ancient push notifications, except the app is called Empire, and the terms are non-negotiable. And still, nothing overt happens. That restraint is deliberate. Rome wants her to remain intact, physically, visibly, politically. Any violation would risk scandal, revenge narratives, divine anger, or simple loss of leverage. The empire fears consequences, not conscience. You begin to see how this constant threat reshapes her identity. She is no longer just a queen without a throne. She is a body under consideration, a presence weighed for risk. That awareness changes how she breathes, moves, waits. One evening, during a routine escort, a soldier steps too close, not touching, just close enough to be felt. A superior snaps a command instantly. The moment evaporates. Order reasserts itself. Rome polices its own shadows when it must. Historians still argue whether such discipline reflects genuine restraint or simple self-interest. Probably both. Empires, like people, can behave well for the wrong reasons. As night settles again, you sit in the dim quiet and realize this section of her captivity may never leave a clear mark in history books. No inscription, no decree. Just a long, exhausting awareness of vulnerability held at bay by calculation. And that, perhaps, is why it matters. Because Rome didn't always need to act. Sometimes it only needed to remind its captives, and itself, of what it could do, and then choose not to. The firelight flickers lower, the lamps dim. The queen rests without truly sleeping, and you understand that restraint, when backed by absolute power, can be as heavy as any chain. By now, you've learned to recognize the rhythm of Rome's intentions by what does not happen. No execution order arrives. No release is granted. Instead, conversations shift, subtly, almost politely, toward usefulness. This is the moment where a queen stops being treated as a defeated enemy and starts being handled as leverage. She is escorted to a different space, brighter, more open, windows instead of narrow slits. This isn't comfort, it's context. Rome wants her thinking about the world beyond stone walls again. A hostage must remember what she stands to lose. The mainstream historical fact anchoring this phase is clear. Rome routinely used elite captives as hostages to secure loyalty from conquered regions. Queens, with their bloodlines and symbolic weight, were particularly valuable. A queen alive in Rome could quiet a province more effectively than a legion stationed there. You hear it in the language officials use now. Stability, peace, understanding. Words that sound gentle until you realize they are substitutes for obedience. Rome reframes domination as mutual benefit. Always has. A courier arrives with letters, carefully selected again. One mentions unrest easing back home. Another hints at potential rebellion if certain arrangements aren't respected. The implication settles without being spoken aloud. Her existence here is part of the equation. A quirky historical tidbit surfaces here from lesser-known accounts. Some captive queens were encouraged to write letters to their people, urging calm. The letters were often dictated, edited, or suggested. Authenticity curated by empire. Historians still argue how effective this tactic truly was. Did people obey out of loyalty to their queen, or simply fear Roman retaliation? The sources blur motive, and Rome never bothered to clarify as long as order held. You watch as she is asked, not commanded, to compose a message. Ink and wax laid out neatly. Guards positioned just far enough away to feel respectful, just close enough to read over shoulders. Choice, without freedom. Her hand hesitates. This is a heavier decision than any parade or interrogation. Words can save lives, or mark her forever as a collaborator. Rome knows this. That's why it asks softly. There's a light, uneasy joke that flickers through your mind. Hostage diplomacy. When your pen becomes a weapon and you're the ammunition. She writes carefully. Neutral phrases. Appeals to safety. No praise for Rome. No call for revolt. Just calm. You sense she is threading a needle, trying to preserve future dignity while surviving the present. Rome accepts this. For now. Flexibility is a Roman virtue when it costs nothing. Her status adjusts again. She is now a guest, a word heavy with quotation marks. Allowed supervised walks. Occasional attendance at public events, always observed. Visibility without autonomy. Presence as pressure. You notice how others react to her now. Officials treat her with measured politeness. Some even defer slightly, not out of respect for her former power, but respect for her current utility. She matters again, just differently. A scholarly uncertainty lingers here. Did some queens grow accustomed to this role, even find a strange influence within it? Or was every smile, every nod, an act performed under duress? The record can't access inner lives, only outcomes. Rome leverages her lineage next. Mentions of marriage surface more clearly. Not threats, proposals, alliances framed as honour, union framed as peace. This is how bloodlines are absorbed, not erased. She listens. You can't read her thoughts, but you feel the weight of it. Marriage here isn't romance, it's annexation by intimacy. Rome doesn't always conquer land with swords. Sometimes it does it with weddings. A guard jokes quietly that this is the gentle way. There's your second light joke, dark and dry. Gentle for whom? Days pass with a new kind of tension. Less fear of immediate harm, more fear of permanent compromise. Execution would end the story. Hostagehood stretches it indefinitely. You realize something quietly devastating. As a hostage, she must remain recognizable, respectable, alive. Rome now has a vested interest in her well-being. Her safety is proof of Roman benevolence. Her survival becomes propaganda. At night, she stands by a window, looking out over tiled roofs and torchlit streets. Somewhere far beyond, her people live ordinary lives, shaped by her absence and her continued breathing. You sit with the thought that Rome has succeeded in its transformation. The queen is no longer a defeated symbol dragged in chains. She is a stabilizing mechanism, a living treaty. And treaties, as you know, can be kept, revised, or broken, depending on how useful they remain. As sleep tugs at you, you sense the next shift approaching. Hostages can be maintained for years, even decades, or they can be moved out of sight once their purpose is served. The firelight dims, the city hum softens, and you understand now, for Rome, mercy and strategy often look identical from the outside. Only time reveals which one you're really witnessing. You notice the change not because anything dramatic happens, but because everything becomes routine. That's how Romanization works best. Quietly, repetitively, until it feels normal to everyone involved. Her days acquire structure now. Fixed meal times, scheduled walks, carefully selected company. Rome loves schedules. They turn resistance into inconvenience and identity into habit. This is no longer about fear alone. This is about replacement. The mainstream historical fact anchoring this phase is well documented. Rome actively encouraged, or enforced, the cultural assimilation of elite captives. Language, dress, etiquette, even posture were subtly reshaped. A Romanized queen was less dangerous than a defiant one, and far more useful. You hear it first in speech. Latin phrases are introduced into conversation, at first as courtesy, then as expectation. Translators grow lazier. Eventually they wait. Silence pressures compliance. Language becomes a gate and Rome holds the key. She adapts because survival requires it. Her Latin is careful, accented, precise. Every sentence feels like crossing a narrow bridge. One misstep and misunderstanding becomes weaponized. There's your first light joke, learning a new language where every grammar mistake might be treason. Clothing follows speech, not imposed outright, suggested, a Roman-style cloak for warmth. Sandals better suited to stone streets. Practical advice that slowly erases visual difference. Soon she looks less like a foreign ruler and more like a slightly unusual Roman noblewoman. You realize how intentional this is. Rome doesn't want her erased. It wants her recognizable, but altered, familiar enough to be trusted, foreign enough to remain interesting. A quirky historical tidbit slips in here. Some captive elites were taught Roman table manners in detail, how to recline, when to speak, which foods to avoid touching with the wrong hand. Dining was political theatre, and missteps could undo months of careful positioning. She attends more gatherings now. Small ones, controlled ones, no shouting crowds, just rooms full of people who matter. Senators' wives, provincial administrators, educated elites who smile warmly while assessing value. You watch her learn when to speak and when silence carries more weight. Roman conversation is competitive, layered, performative. She adapts quickly. Too quickly, some might say. Adaptation becomes another accusation waiting to happen. Historians still argue whether Romanization was experienced by captives as coercion or opportunity. The truth likely shifts day to day. Choice under captivity is never pure, but neither is resistance. Religion is handled delicately. She's allowed to keep her gods, for now. But Roman gods are introduced socially. Invitations to festivals, casual references to Jupiter, Juno, Minerva. Participation framed as politeness, not conversion. Pressure disguised as inclusion. You notice how guards fade slightly into the background. Not gone, never gone, but less visible. Surveillance becomes architectural. Doors placed just so, routes subtly constrained, control embedded into space itself. Her letters home change tone. Still calm, still measured. But Roman phrases creep in. Roman concepts. Peace defined as order. Stability defined as obedience. Language carries ideology whether it wants to or not. A scholarly uncertainty hovers here. At what point does adaptation become transformation? Did some queens eventually think of themselves as Roman? Or did they perform Romanness like an accent that never quite sticks? The sources only show outcomes, not inner fractures. One afternoon she is presented with a small choice. Attend a Roman festival, or remain in residence. No penalty stated. She attends. Of course she does. Absence would be noticed. Participation can always be reframed as gratitude. There's your second light joke. You think of this as the world's slowest, politest makeover montage. You watch as she navigates rituals, mimics gestures, learns when applause is expected. The crowd responds warmly, not enthusiastically, yet, but approvingly. Approval is addictive. Rome understands this deeply. At night, she practices Latin quietly, repeating phrases under her breath. The lamp flickers. Shadows move. You wonder which language she dreams in now. Dreams are often the last place identity retreats to. And still, there is resistance. But it's internal, subtle. She preserves certain habits privately. A way of tying hair, a silent prayer before sleep. Small acts. Rome doesn't bother policing because they don't threaten order. Rome doesn't need total conversion. It needs public compliance and symbolic alignment. The rest can remain hidden, like an old foundation under new stone. Another fringe detail surfaces. Some Roman elites found Romanized captives fascinating, precisely because they straddled worlds, exotic enough to impress, familiar enough to trust. Cultural liminality as social capital. You feel the weight of that realization. Romanization is not just suppression, it's absorption. The empire grows not by erasing difference, but by digesting it. As weeks blur into months, you almost forget what she looked like on the battlefield. Chains feel distant, dust replaced by marble. And that forgetting, that smoothing of memory, is exactly the point. You sit quietly as she laughs softly at a Roman joke, timed perfectly. The room relaxes, approval settles like a blanket, and you understand now, forced Romanization doesn't always feel like force. Sometimes it feels like relief, like safety, like belonging offered at a price so gradual it's hard to name when you finally pay it. The lamps dim, the city hums gently beyond the walls, and somewhere between who she was and who she must appear to be, a queen learns how empires don't just conquer lands, they conquer habits, until resistance feels exhausting and adaptation feels like rest. You sense the shift before anyone says it aloud. The conversations slow, the visits thin out, decisions that once hovered just out of reach begin to harden into plans. This is where Rome chooses distance over display. Execution is no longer on the table, not because of mercy, but because of math. The mainstream historical fact is straightforward. Rome often preferred exile to execution for captured royalty once their symbolic value had been extracted. Dead queens could inspire martyrdom. Living, distant ones faded quietly. She is informed gently. A residence outside the city. A household. Supervision. Not freedom. Containment softened into routine. The word exile is never used. Rome prefers euphemisms. You notice her reaction is almost imperceptible. Relief, maybe. Disappointment, certainly. Exile is survival stretched thin. It promises life at the cost of relevance. A quirky historical tidbit surfaces here from scattered accounts. Some exiled captives were given stipends larger than those of ordinary Roman citizens. Comfort as anesthesia. If life feels stable enough, resistance loses urgency. Preparations begin. Wardrobes adjusted again. Now fully Roman. Travel arrangements discreet. No procession. No audience. Rome sends her away the way it finishes paperwork. Efficiently, quietly, without drama. Historians still argue whether exile was experienced as mercy or punishment. The answer depends on what you value more, breathing or belonging. Rome understood that ambiguity and used it freely. You travel with her along well-maintained roads, past vineyards and villas. This journey feels nothing like the first march. No chains, no crowds, just distance accumulating mile by mile. Her new residence is pleasant, sunlit, surrounded by gardens. Guards are present, but unobtrusive. Neighbors are polite, curious, careful. She becomes a feature of the landscape, a story people tell softly over meals. Rome has achieved something elegant here. She is alive, visible enough to reassure, distant enough to forget. Her people back home hear nothing alarming. No execution, no triumph, just silence. A scholarly uncertainty lingers. Did Rome ever intend exile to be permanent, or was it simply a holding pattern until circumstances changed? The empire rarely committed when flexibility remained useful. She adapts again. Of course she does. Humans are remarkable that way. Days fill with small rituals, gardening, reading, occasional visits from officials checking compliance like one checks a lock. There's your light joke. You think of this as the ancient version of being soft-launched into obscurity. Her letters home slow, then stop, either discouraged or unnecessary. Order has settled. Rome sees no need to keep pressing. At night she walks the garden paths, listening to insects hum. Fireflies flicker like embers drifting through air. The world feels smaller now, quieter, contained. You realize something quietly devastating. Exile works because it gives the illusion of choice. She can live, she can age, she can remember, but she cannot matter in the way she once did. And Rome doesn't need to watch her closely anymore. The empire has already won. As sleep edges closer, you sit with the image of a queen alive, safe and effectively removed from history's center. No chains, no crown. just time passing. Tomorrow will look like today, and the day after that. That sameness is the final tool Rome uses. Not violence, not spectacle, but monotony. The lamps dim, the garden settles, and you understand now why exile was often the empire's preferred ending. It leaves no dramatic scars, no rallying cry, just a life gently pushed off stage, where applause never reaches and rebellion slowly forgets what it was meant to sound like. You feel the weight of history pressing gently now, not like a sword, but like a steady hand. Queens who resisted, truly resisted, leave traces you can almost sense between the lines of Roman records, not in official accounts, which love order and obedience, but in whispers, letters, and anecdotes preserved by those paying attention. You see her practicing small defiance, a turn of the head, a raised eyebrow, a word carefully chosen in Latin with a double meaning. The mainstream historical fact is that some captured queens did manage to assert agency, even under surveillance. Resistance could be subtle, psychological, and deeply symbolic. You notice how soldiers respond. Some are amused, others annoyed, all cautious. Roman discipline was powerful, but it was designed for predictability, not creativity. That's her advantage. Cleverness is hard to regulate. A quirky historical tidbit comes to mind. One queen reportedly organized secret lessons for her attendants in her native language, while under Roman supervision. Scholars still debate whether this really happened, or is an embellished story to celebrate ingenuity, but imagine it, teaching quietly under the empire's nose. She tests boundaries with small rituals too, touching familiar religious objects, humming old songs, or positioning herself just slightly differently during processions. Nothing overt. Everything recorded in subtle observation. Rome notices, evaluates, tolerates when convenient. Historians still argue whether such acts of resistance truly affected policy, or were simply personal victories. Maybe both. Small acts have ripple effects, but sometimes the ripples are invisible to contemporaries. You walk with her as she navigates public appearances now, controlled events, invited audiences. The balance between compliance and subtle autonomy is delicate, like walking on a narrow ledge. One misstep risks interpretation, sanction, or rumor. You sense her mental armor hardening. Silent strategies, careful observation, and measured responses. Resistance becomes internalized, performed with a smile that may hide thoughts no one can predict. Her presence alone is now a quiet counterpoint to Roman control. A light joke surfaces in your mind. She's a one-woman protest that Rome can't fully censor. Every polite nod, every measured pause carries a subtext that no scroll or decree can erase. She survives, in part, because resistance is invisible. You watch her carefully orchestrate it, knowing each gesture matters, each word weighs in. She bends without breaking, a living paradox. Present but untouchable, compliant but autonomous. The soldiers remark on her poise, some even admire it quietly. They cannot act against it. Rome allows performance to continue so long as order is maintained. Even subtle defiance is tolerated, as long as it doesn't disrupt spectacle. By nightfall, the city is calm. The queen rests under quiet watch, her mind alert yet contained. You see how history will remember some of her acts, but many vanish, ephemeral victories hidden in routine, unnoticed by most, recorded only by time. And you feel finally the tension between survival and selfhood, between visibility and influence, between compliance and quiet rebellion. Resistance can exist in shadows as well as in open defiance, and sometimes the smallest acts leave the longest echoes. You notice the subtle shift in her world as months stretch into years. Life has settled into rhythms so steady they almost feel natural, but you know better. Rome's control is not in loud proclamations anymore. It's in the quiet repetition, the subtle enforcement, the predictable structure that shapes thought as much as action. Her quarters have become a sanctuary and a cage at the same time. She can walk, speak, and even read, but every movement is measured. The mainstream historical fact is that long-term captivity for royalty often involved careful management of morale, enough freedom to prevent despair, enough constraint to prevent escape or influence. Rome balances constraint with subtle incentives, a careful psychological calculus. You watch her in the garden at sunset. Olive trees cast long shadows across gravel paths. She touches leaves absent-mindedly, tracing veins with fingers that once commanded armies. The shift is remarkable. The daily exposure to Roman order has changed her, but not entirely. Some core remains intact, hidden beneath the routine and the layers of Romanization. A quirky historical tidbit: Roman guards reportedly noted that some captive queens developed new hobbies under supervision, like embroidery or music, and sometimes used them to communicate coded messages to loyal attendants or distant supporters. Scholars still argue whether these activities were purely recreational or subtle acts of influence. Her daily interactions have evolved too. Roman officials visit less frequently, not because they forget her, but because she has become predictable. She is alive, compliant, and symbolic, but she is no longer a threat. The empire's eyes shift elsewhere, leaving her to navigate a delicate balance between obedience and self-preservation. You notice how her speech patterns have subtly changed. Latin dominates casual conversation, yet she retains phrases from her native tongue, carefully peppered in to remind herself of identity. Resistance is quiet now, woven into language, gestures, and the small personal rituals she maintains in private. Historians still debate how much long-term captivity shaped these women psychologically. Did they internalize Roman values, or did they maintain a private world of autonomy invisible to overseers? Likely some combination of both. The evidence is tantalizingly incomplete. A light joke comes to mind. You think of her life as a game of chess where she knows the rules, but Rome controls the board. Each move she makes is strategic, silent, and deliberate. Survival requires subtlety more than strength. You observe her interactions with attendants. She commands quietly now, not by force but through influence. Respect is earned, not demanded. The subtlety of authority in captivity is fascinating. Rome cannot monitor every gesture, every conversation, and here she thrives in the gaps. The city beyond the walls moves on. Markets bustle, children play, festivals pass. She is part of the scene, yet apart from it, a living reminder of conquest, a presence that matters only if people remember why she exists. As night falls, oil lamps flicker across her quarters. Shadows stretch long and quiet. You feel the weight of endurance, the quiet triumph of maintaining selfhood under watchful eyes. Rome has taken much, but it has not taken everything. You notice the quiet power she now wields, not in armies, not in decrees, but in observation and subtle influence. Life has become a long rehearsal in patience, a negotiation between visibility and privacy. Rome has done what it does best, transformed her into a figure who matters enough to be seen, but never enough to threaten. Her quarters are arranged with careful attention to routine, lamps positioned to minimize shadows, windows to catch the sun at just the right angle, furniture placed for both comfort and control. This is the mainstream historical fact. Rome's careful management of captive queens extended to their environment. Architecture becomes a tool of subtle governance, shaping behavior without commands. You see her adapt again. She rises with the sun, walks the garden paths with precise steps, practices Latin quietly under her breath. Her own habits have become a form of self-preservation, a rhythm that shields the mind even as it obeys the eye. A quirky historical tidbit emerges here. Some queens were said to cultivate gardens of plants native to their homeland. Not only a comfort, but also a subtle reminder of identity. Scholars still debate whether this was symbolic defiance or merely nostalgia. Either way, the gesture matters. Conversations with visitors have become exercises in diplomacy. Governors, envoys, and clerks are guided by her presence. She nods, smiles politely, chooses silence or speech with equal care. Each interaction is a negotiation. Even without overt authority, she exerts influence through attention and timing. Historians still argue whether this kind of influence counts as agency or merely survival strategy. The line is blurred, and the ambiguity may be precisely the point. Rome allows survival, but not sovereignty, and she thrives in that space. A light joke forms in your mind. She's a chess player invisible to the other pieces, moving silently, never risking capture, always shaping the game in subtle, invisible ways. Letters continue. sent sparingly to her homeland, carefully vetted, each word chosen to reassure without provoking, to maintain dignity without defiance. She has become a curator of communication, a gatekeeper of information. Even control of correspondence is a tool of influence. As months stretch into years, she observes Rome in miniature, the rituals, the routines, the human patterns. She notes habits of officials, the timing of guards, the subtle hierarchy shifts. Observation becomes her instrument, her private power. Even her guards learn from her. They notice restraint, dignity, and strategy. The quiet lessons they receive are indirect but undeniable. Command does not always come from rank, and influence is often unseen. At night, you watch her sit by a lamp, pen in hand, sketching the garden or copying a passage from a book. The firelight flickers softly, casting shadows that seem to mimic her patience. You realize that endurance has become both shield and weapon, and Rome's control, while formidable, is imperfect. By the candle's dim glow, she embodies something curious. A life both confined and autonomous, watched and unseen, controlled and quietly assertive. The city hums beyond the walls, unaware of the depth of strategy unfolding in silence. You sense it now, the final stage, though not an ending in the dramatic sense. Time has stretched and layered itself over her life like sediment, each day leaving marks invisible to casual observers. Rome has done what it does best, converted chaos into routine, spectacle into quiet order, fear into habituation. She rises early, the sun spilling light across the courtyard, casting patterns that shift with the hour. The guards are attentive but relaxed. Visitors come and go according to a predictable rhythm. She moves through the space with measured grace, aware of every footfall, every glance. The mainstream historical fact remains. Long-term captives, especially queens, often gained a kind of constrained autonomy simply by surviving and adapting. Survival becomes a subtle assertion of agency in itself. Letters continue to flow sparingly to distant lands, carefully vetted, composed with skill. Each word is a negotiation, each phrase a gesture of survival. You notice how she balances truth and diplomacy, subtly shaping perception while avoiding direct confrontation. The art of being heard without being punished becomes a daily practice. A quirky historical tidbit. Some queens under Roman captivity reportedly organized small private celebrations of their native festivals, hiding them under the guise of domestic routines. Scholars still debate the authenticity of these accounts, but the idea itself is tantalizing. A quiet rebellion woven into ordinary acts. You observe how she interacts with her attendants. Respect is earned not through fear or title, but through the consistent demonstration of poise and insight. Influence, silent but perceptible, travels in gestures, in timing, in knowing when to speak and when to remain still. This is agency shaped under constraint, a form of mastery invisible to those who do not pay attention. Historians still argue how much these subtle actions mattered to Rome itself. Did they genuinely worry about her influence, or were they merely content so long as no overt disruption occurred? Likely both. Rome was pragmatic, and survival required navigation of this ambiguity. The garden stretches before her, quiet and orderly. Olive trees sway gently, the scent of herbs and flowers mingling in the warm air. Fireflies begin their nightly dance. She walks among them, measuring each step, each inhalation, as if the world itself were a chessboard, and she the only player allowed to move. You notice her laughter now. It comes easily at times, carefully measured at others. It is a tool, a shield, a soft assertion that she is still fully human, still fully herself. Even in captivity, the act of choosing when to laugh is a quiet form of power. Letters, gardens, careful gestures, measured laughter. Rome has controlled the obvious, but the subtle remains her domain. Survival has become artful. Adaptation, an act of quiet resistance. Memory, a private kingdom she maintains even while the empire surrounds her. She settles at night by the lamp, firelight flickering across pages of carefully copied notes, sketches and reflections. The city beyond hums its usual patterns, and you see now that captivity is not merely about chains or triumphs, but about shaping life itself, how one breathes, observes, remembers, and quietly asserts autonomy in ways that leave no immediate mark but echo endlessly in history's quiet corners. The rhythm of endurance, of observation, of careful engagement has become her legacy. Rome has claimed visibility. She has reclaimed presence. The balance between empire and self, control and subtle assertion, persists, delicate and unbroken. Now, the day recedes and the city's hum softens into a distant, gentle pulse. You imagine the queen by the firelight, the embers glowing like tiny stars suspended in warmth, flickering shadows across her quiet, measured world. The lamps in her quarters cast long, soft lines, and the air is thick with the scent of herbs and wax, comforting and familiar, grounding her in this altered life. The olive trees in her garden sway slowly in a night breeze that carries the faint scent of distant streets, laughter, and the ever-present hum of Rome's heartbeat. Each shadow stretches like memory, reaching back to battles fought, triumphs witnessed, and choices made in silence. She sits still, letting the moments accumulate without urgency, absorbing the city's soft nocturnal rhythm as a balm for years of tension. You notice the fire dwindling in the hearth, glowing embers fading to gentle warmth. Each flicker reminds you how slowly endurance reshapes a life. The past, once loud and demanding, now becomes a quiet companion. Each memory folds into the next like soft pages turning in the dim light, shaping who she has become, who she remains, and who she might yet be. The air hums with possibility even in stillness. Time stretches, unpressured, allowing thoughts to drift gently like leaves floating along a calm stream. You can almost hear the faint echoes of a life lived fully even under constraints, reminding you that quiet persistence is its own form of freedom. And as the night deepens, the fire's glow fades to warmth against stone and memory. The city exhales its last breath of the day, and you feel the slow pull of rest. Your eyelids grow heavy, your mind softens. The story rests here, in gentle embers and whispered remembrance, carrying you toward your own dreams. Good night.